Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Megan here, the faithful fibromyalgia warrior, and I'm so glad you guys came back to the channel to watch this video. If you are new to my channel, thanks for stopping by. I hope you'll give it a thumbs up, and I hope you subscribe as well and join the rest of the group. And if you're back because you liked what you've seen before and you want more, welcome and thanks for your support. So I guess it's been about a week since my last video, and I've just been watching so many interesting and amazing podcasts and video interviews by so many different amazing experts in this low-carb keto carnivore space about the reasons why a meat-based diet is the best for us and our health, but also it made me realize that, in fact, it is the diet that God wants us to follow. You know, those of us who are spiritual or faithful as well, that's how God laid things out for us. Even if you go back into Genesis, he did things in a certain order, right? Created the earth, made the heavens, all the stars, all the planets, all the moons, the galaxies that we know and don't know yet. He gave us day and night and light and dark, and separated the land with water in between. Now it says that was done in a couple days. Now here's the thing, just for one moment, for those of you who maybe aren't believers and say, well, that couldn't have happened, let me finish. That doesn't mean I believe it was a full day realistically, because science has shown that, in fact, that is not the case. However, if you dig through your scriptures, and Paul wrote this to the churches more than once, what he wrote to them, though, was to remind them that a day to God is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. In other words, what God understands as time is not what we understand as time as human beings. So what God may have said to Moses in order to write down the book of Genesis may have been in my first day of creating. Well, that's a day to him, which could easily be millions of years to the human understanding. Okay, so which is what I think it means. That's just my personal interpretation. You guys can look that up yourself, but based on some of the research I've done, I believe that is what was intended when God spoke to Moses and gave him all of the information that later got written up as the book of Genesis, and obviously going forward. Okay, so it wasn't like an actual day as we understand. It's a day based on what God understands, whatever his timing is, okay, which could be hundreds of thousands and millions of years. But without a doubt, first came the earth, and then the heavens, and the next thing that was created were the plants. Okay, and those took thousands and thousands and millions of years to evolve to cover the earth. Why? Because eventually animals were going to be created, and then humans, and it was done in that order. Why? So the animals would have a food source, and then humans would have a food source. And you look through the first few chapters of Genesis, and it is explicitly pointed out that there are trees that have, that bear fruit with seeds for humans to be able to eat. So fruits, berries, well, berries are fruits, obviously, but it particularly refers to the fruits. Then it talks about all of the animals, all the creatures of the air, of the sea, and that move on the land are there for humans to eat. And by the time in chapter 9, Noah is being addressed, saying, just remember, all domesticated animals and the wildlife are available for food. So what does that tell me? Well, obviously, it tells me that the plan all along was that certain fruits and certain different berries and apples and citrus and all that stuff, depending on where you were in the world at the time and whether or not there was still an ice age, those fruits would grow. But the grass was always referred to as feeding the animals. So all these grasses and cereals that they would eat naturally today were what they ate naturally all the time. And so that's not stuff that we are supposed to be eating. It was never intended for us to eat long term. It was always meant for the animals. But of course, the biggest problem was that all the major mega animals, the woolly mammoths, the non-woolly mammoths, the mastodons, all those big animals that existed at the same time as our ancestors, you know, some 200,000 years ago, we hunted them out to extinction. And so the reason why fruits evolved was because I think God knew that within ourselves, we would not be able to share and make the food last. I mean, there was no refrigeration. Cooking the meat only eventually became a thing. You had to eat it while it was fresh, right? But eventually, we hunted those big animals to extinction. And so what do? So historians and anthropologists and archaeologists have confirmed that the oldest human beings are at least 230 years old, 230,000 years old, and likely longer, but they're talking about Homo sapiens sapiens. So what we would see most closely resemble the modern human, okay? And I do agree that as human beings, we've evolved within our own species. Absolutely. From other animals, no. That's me personally. However, that isn't even the point. As human beings, we've evolved. So the first humans that closely resemble what we look like today were found in Africa. And the remains were found in, I believe it was Ethiopia and some in Kenya, so up in the northeast, right? So you're in a climate where at that time you would have had quite a bit of fruit available, as well as you weren't, you could get just to water for fish, as well as you would have the big animals until we killed them all, and then the smaller animals. So when we as a prehistoric people first arrived, we had to figure out how to get meat, right? We somehow knew instinctually we needed animals to help us be fed and not be hungry. We had somebody was the volunteer guinea pig who had to eat the different berries and fruit looking like items and wait and see if they died or not. And that was how they determined, well, this you can have and you won't die or get sick, so that one's okay. And I would imagine it was by observing the animals in the wild themselves, watching the actual predators and how they hunted and killed the big animals and ate them, that made some human think at some point, what if we ate that? Because if all you're having is berries or fruit when it's available, when it existed, that's not going to fill you for very long. Even if you figured out, oh, maybe if we caught some fish or ate some flying things, some birds, well, even if you did that, it's still not going to provide you with a whole lot of energy and food. It just isn't. And so somewhere in our evolution, we realized we need to eat animals. We need the meat, we need the fat to fill us. And plus, it'll feed our whole tribe, right? And then over the years, as we evolved further, this is long before the agrarian revolution, we worked as groups. And it was found that, the anthropologists, archaeologists, historians, all the people who specialize in this stuff found that likely the women did help the men to hunt in the beginning, because everybody had to get involved. If you were going to chase after, track down, and chase a great big woolly mammoth or mastodon and get it to go off a cliff so it would die, and then you would have to get help dragging it back to the center of your little group that at that point would have been mostly in caves likely. And when those died out, I think it was around 11,000, 12,000 BC, well, then what? Well, now we need to find what else are we going to eat. So between when our first ancestors appeared in Africa and the end of that final ice age, which was around, if I'm remembering it correctly, was around 11,000 or so BC, right towards the end of that final ice age, you had all kinds of people migrating from Africa, chasing after the big animals. Some stayed where they were and didn't want to keep moving. They figured they might try going after the smaller animals. They didn't want to go far to chase the big animals. So some of them stayed where they were. But basically what happened as humans is we migrated. So some of these human beings migrated north into Europe, Scandinavia. I don't know why I'm doing hands, like there's a map in front of me, there isn't. And even as far north as Siberia. And of course, over millennia, the further away they got from Africa and the sun, the less plants they had, the more they had to hunt for animals to eat. And also their skin would start to get lighter because there was less sun. They didn't need all the pigmentation to avoid getting sunburned, right? So there was less sun the further north they went. And eventually you had people who crossed the land bridge from Siberia to the Arctic. I think they've anthropologists have said there was 3 or 4 waves of people that crossed, but one of the last waves that crossed were the Thule people, who would end up becoming the Inuit, who still live today in northern Alaska and northern Arctic Canada and also in Greenland. And these people never survived on any sort of plants because the ice never receded that far back. It was forever ice covered. They learned to adapt. They learned how to get, hunt for whales and polar bear and northern Arctic foxes and whatever else they could find that was up there, and then whatever fish they could catch, etc. And they thrived. Some of the humans who, over that prehistoric time, let's say between 230 BC and 10,000 BC, they migrated from Africa. They headed east, right? They went north, they headed towards Asia. They went sort of south and east, and they ended up in Australia. And some of them, from what I understand, they also migrated and they headed west, and they ended up in the Caribbean and Mexico, Central America, and South America. And those who were in Asia headed east and ended up in the west coast of Canada and the United States, and then they migrated across those plains, going, following the bison, the buffalo, oxen, whatever they could. Now, I think it was around somewhere between, and if I'm wrong with my dates, my apologies, but I believe it was somewhere between 5,000 and 3,000 BC, sort of between the Mesopotamian and the beginning of the Egyptian empires, where people realized that suddenly these great big animals that were slow and not so smart and had been easy to sort of trap and kill were all gone. And if they wanted meat, they would have to be faster and smarter and have better weapons. So over millennia, of course, again, we evolved as people. We developed clothing out of animal skins. We figured out how to weave fabrics and all that kind of stuff. But we also not only found seasonal fruit, but in order to survive until we were able to catch those super quick wolves and saber-toothed cats and other such things, we ended up, basically what we had to do was we had to figure out how to survive on other stuff. And somebody discovered and realized that, say in Africa particularly, that wheat was a key staple, that if they ground it up and mixed the powder form with a bit of oil and maybe some water and baked it, that would be bread. and that would fill people up until somebody could actually go out and catch animals, right? And the same thing, maize, or basically a form of corn, was easily grown, and instead of just feeding it to some other animals, which they would learn eventually to domesticate, but they didn't yet, they discovered things like pulses and lentils and grains and some fruit and peppers, nightshades, and that became their staple diet. And they would eat wild fish, and they would eat animals when they did catch them, but for a lot of time in between, they couldn't catch. If they didn't catch anything, they had to eat something to survive. And so from an prehistoric time period even to today, you still have the people in Mexico and Central and South Americas eating like a maize porridge with peppers and things in it, and or tortillas. That's where those were first invented, because up until Christopher Columbus arrived, which was like 5,000 years later, they didn't have domesticated animals in that part of the world. You know, the native people of Canada and the U.S., they didn't have the mastodons and those mega animals, but they had fairly big animals like moose and deer, and bear, and elk and bison and whatever else they could catch and eat. And that's what they hunted as they moved to different pockets across the Great Plains and ended up settling in different areas there. And so we evolved differently, right? And so we've all migrated out over millennia from Africa. And as we spread out, because we killed off all of the really, really mega huge sized animals that would have fed our tribe for a week or two easily, we had to learn to adapt. But of course, adapting takes time. We had to learn how to communicate. We had to learn how to develop and design weapons for hunting, and what to do when we caught the animal, and how would we prepare it, and who got to eat first, and all of those things. And so all societies, by the time the agricultural revolution had already happened, and we're now looking at the Mesopotamian into the Egyptian civilizations, right? Which is where the story kind of begins, really, of going forward from the Bible of the Jewish people and how Christians came out of that. But we are talking the Middle East, right? And by now, farming is a thing. Some people did raise livestock at that point. Some people did have, obviously they had oxen to pull their plows, but also to be slaughtered on special occasions. They had sheep. They had goats. They did not raise pigs because of, what their beliefs were back in the day. They misunderstood what God was telling them about what foods were okay and clean and which ones weren't, and they assumed that pork could not be eaten, and so they didn't. And it wasn't until well into the New Testament times that those who were Jewish but became disciples were like, wait a minute, all food is from God. And the message still at this time was, guys, yes, I have given you all the trees with the seed-bearing fruit. Also, I've given you all the domesticated animals and the wild ones as your food. And, they have this thing where, I want to say iodine. It's not. It's a special scientific way of testing. It's isotope. There it is. Isotope testing that they've developed. And they can actually tell exactly what foods our ancestors ate based on isotope testing they can do of the remains within their bones. And the majority of them, we're talking before the agricultural revolution, before the great civilizations rose up, primarily ate meat with fat, fruit when it was available, and that was it. That was what they ate. And they thrived, they evolved, they survived to eventually become who we are today. So that to me is so cool, like how all of it works together. And you know what? When I woke up this morning, so my one dog gets me up every morning just before 7, which is fine because I'm usually up at 7 anyways. I've been able to develop a pretty good circadian rhythm. It took a few weeks, and now I don't rely on coffee to get up in the morning, and I sleep well at night, and I wear my blue blockers right after dinner so that I can start, blocking out the signals, and my brain cycles down and I have good sleep. But when I got up this morning, I was just grateful that I was alive. I was so thankful. I'm here. I'm alive. God loves me. Well, he loves all of us, obviously. And I'm going to heaven someday. That's amazing. But what I have taken even greater joy in lately is the fact that as I stick with pretty much pure carnivore, is honestly, my inflammation is almost zero. And since last week, I've been able to cut down on some of my pain medications. I take cocotamol, and each tablet is 30 milligrams of codeine with 500 milligrams of paracetamol, which is basically equivalent to Tylenol in the States or Canada. So it's like basically having a Tylenol 3 with codeine. And I used to take 2 of those 4 times a day, every single day, since April of 2014, without fail. But I've been feeling so much energy and so much calmness in my pain levels, and it was for my back, that over the last few days, I've been able to cut it down from 4 times a day to 3, which for me is massive. I can delay it now, and I don't feel an agonizing pain. And that to me is, wow, I never ever thought that was possible. I was able to, early this morning, I was able to thank God and talk with him and pray, and it was fantastic, and I felt inspired, and I was actually able to roll out my yoga mat, lay down on my back with my knees up, and just do some abdominal tightening exercises, core strengthening exercises, and some very gentle yoga bridges. I never, ever, ever, ever thought I'd be able to do that. I never thought I'd be able to do that. If you had told me even 2 months ago that I would be able to lay on my back, even with my knees bent, for any amount of time, and do some gentle stretches, and it would help ease the pain in my lower back, or that it would just help me feel more energized or get my endorphins going, I never would believe you. I'd be like, there's absolutely no way. If you had told me even 2 months ago, even 2 weeks ago, that I could see how I did with cutting down my pain medications from 4 times a day for that particular one to 3, I just said, you're nuts. And yet here we are. And all of this is absolutely from God. You know why? Because he led me to it. I know that may sound a bit woohoo and silly, but hear me out, guys. It is absolutely true. For those of you who do not know, by May 30th of 2020, I was 190 pounds. I'm 5'5", okay? And for me, that's way too much weight. That was my weight during my first pregnancy 22 years ago. And I was severely bloated. My IBS was horrific. I had constant constipation. My stress levels were through the roof. My anxiety would not stop. My depression was even still there, even in spite of taking antidepressants. And my chronic pain from my lower back never ended, and my pain from fibromyalgia, in spite of taking gabapentin, was still there. And I thought it would never, ever, ever go away. And there's nothing I can do. I had zero hope because I can't go to the gym. I can't lift anything heavy because I'm at high risk of having another disc bulge, which is what I suffered from back in 2014. As soon as I started going keto, that alone made huge differences. So even though I've lost 80 pounds, about 60 to 65 pounds of what I lost was through keto, but I found I was still feeling quite bloated. I was still having gut issues. I have a very leaky gut. And I found that once I gave up those last few things, almond milk, sweeteners, regular coffee, and all dairy, I've cut it all out. It made a unbelievable difference. I never ever thought I would ever feel this good again, ever. And so, you know, today it was great. Today my husband and I were just out in town, and we were going past one of the jewelry stores, and I was sharing with him some things I've learned, some stuff I've been watching, which he is now keto. And he actually wanted to hear what I had to say, which is great. He's not quite ready to watch the amount of videos that I do, but he wanted to hear what some of the doctors I've been watching have been saying, you know, Dr. Baker and Dr. Chaffee and loads of others, and Dr. Zaldivar, of course, but there's many, many more. I'll put all their names down below so you guys can check them out as well on YouTube. And as we were going past this very nice, very posh store that sells Rolex, he looked up in the window, and a guy that used to be a personal trainer at the gym that my husband still goes to was working there. I guess he'd been there for a while. And so we went in because he wanted to say hi. So we went in, and I met this guy, and my husband had been in before and had been telling him that, you know, I had been keto, and now I was helping him with keto, and that I had had so much health improvement and all this kind of stuff. So he asked me, and he says, oh, so you've been keto, have you? I said, yeah, but just over, well, I'm carnivore now, but yes, I started out keto. I've lost 80 pounds so far, and it's really improved reduction of pain in my joints and everything else, you know, brain fog and all that. And he said, wow, that's a lot of weight. I said, yeah, you know, I do some yoga stretches, and that's about it. And he said, well, you know, that's good. He goes, you know, yeah, the keto diet, that's kind of a, I don't know, that's a bit of a weird one. He says, you know, you can't do it for too long because your brain will suffer because your body needs glucose. And I got the chance to actually correct him with the right information. I said, actually, carbohydrates are not a required macronutrient. They're not essential. And he says, oh, well, yeah, but the brain needs glucose. I'm like, no, I know. But actually, when the body stops burning carbs, it's more than happy to burn and convert the body fat you have on you into ketones, and that then gets converted into glucose for the brain through gluconeogenesis. I said, the body does not need carbohydrates at all. It's not required. And he's like, really? I was like, hey, look, it's worked for me. I've cut out carbs and everything else, and I've lost all this weight, and it's improving my overall health. He's like, oh. I said, but yeah, no, carbohydrates are not required. And my husband kind of joked. He's like, uh-oh, are we going to be, you guys are going to be nice to each other, right? I'm like, oh, yeah, no, of course, you know, kept it polite. But I was like, yeah, no, the brain does not require glucose from carbs in order to get glucose for the brain. And I only knew that because of all the great videos I've watched. And then I said to him, I said, well, you know, actually, if you want to know more, you should follow this guy on YouTube, Professor Bart Kay. He's in New Zealand. He's got great videos, and he's very scientific, and he explains how the metabolism really works and why we don't need carbs. And yeah, he's funny. So you should definitely check him out. And he's like, oh, well, you know, he's like, oh, well, it's hard to keep up with all the different diets. I've been out of diet and fitness industry now for a while, but okay. And I said, hey, you know what? This works for me. If other people have something that works for them, good for them. Seriously, good for them. Go for it. You know, I said, just this is just what works for me, and it's working for my husband as well. And he said, oh, well, that's great. And then we carried on and chatted about other stuff, but it felt so awesome to tell somebody who was a personal trainer, look, sorry, dude, but you're actually wrong. And it's a good thing you're not doing personal training, because you'd be teaching your clients the wrong information, which, you know what, with all the rabbit holes I've gone into regarding all that, it's no wonder people believe it. You know, check out videos by Dr. Sarah Zaldivar. She's got loads of them. She has a PhD in nutrition science and physiology. I believe, yeah, and sorry, physiology, either physical exercise or physiology, but she's extremely bright. And, you know, one of the first things she'll say is that everything that they are taught as nutritionists is wrong. The American American Dietetics Association was founded by Seventh-day Adventists, which included Dr. Kellogg, the guy who invented cornflakes and all those other crap cereals that are not good for us. Because at the time, according to their religious beliefs, the best way to help people to not struggle with lust and sexual impurity was to weaken their entire bodies so that they had no, they basically had no urges. And the best way to do that, to get your hormones to slow down in that regard, was to stop eating meat, which gives us the healthy hormones that we require for libido and all that kind of stuff, which are markers of good health, and swap it out for vegetables, which explains why when you eat carb heavy, even if it's vegetables and fruits, a lot of times you're going to feel exhausted. Why? Because you get the sugar rush and then the big crash, because it's not providing you with the nutrients that you require. So that makes sense. And a lot of people don't know this, or just don't care. They just are happy to go along and accept whatever they're told because that's what they're told, even if it's wrong, which is unfortunate, which is really sad. And so, this guy's a nice young man. He obviously believes what he was told, but he was told the wrong information. And the problem is that although Canada and the UK and every nation has its own set of food guides, but a lot of them very closely shadow whatever the US does. At least that was the case. I remember the Canadian food guide was almost exactly the same as the US food guide when they first came out in the 70s. And in both cases, they were trying to get people to eat I think it was something like 6 or 7 servings of grains and cereals a day. Minimal red meat, margarine, which is like absolute poison. It was basically, they had the seed oil that was left over from processing cotton, and somebody decided, hey, why don't we tell the public it's edible, and we'll mix it into like a yellow color and we'll call it margarine, and people believed it. So yeah, don't eat margarine. It's absolutely bad for you. It's so horrible for you, as are all seed oils, by the way. Dr. Anthony Chaffee talks about in a lot of his videos the fact of how the American Heart Association back in 2015 released a paper or an article. I think it was a paper with perhaps an article, published one that said, look, we were wrong about cholesterol causing heart disease. And back in the late 60s, there was 3 Harvard professors who were paid off by the sugar company to say that it was not sugar that was causing the issues of heart disease, but in fact it was cholesterol from unsaturated fat, and that sugar should simply be considered as a what do they call it, as an empty calorie, without explaining to people that actually all sugar, when it converts into your body, just becomes fat anyways. And so you get all these things like fat-free cookies, fat-free ice cream, etc., etc. Meanwhile, it doesn't matter. It's full of sugar. It's still going to cause you problems. So even though they essentially recanted back in 2015, people still believe that it's the red meat that is the problem for heart disease. It's not. It's all the other carbs and the processed crap that's the issue. I remember when after my father had his heart attack, that he was told, don't eat red meat, eat lots of healthy grains and fruit. And meanwhile, that was the worst thing he should have been having. That was the worst thing. He made loads and loads of pasta dishes and all sorts of simple carbs, and that was the worst possible thing for him. But we didn't know that at the time. We thought we were doing the right thing. There was never butter in the house. It was always margarine, and everything was low fat. And a generation of, how could we? Wow. Because we were lied to. And the problem was, because these guys came out of Harvard, they were well reputed automatically by that fact. And whatever they came out with for the U.S. was then closely copied by Canada and the UK and other countries because, well, Harvard was one of the most reputable universities ever. And so if that's what they're saying, then it's going to be true for us too. And so everybody kind of did the same thing. So this guy, who's unfortunately the one who accepted the payoff, has since died. I think he ended up getting like $5,000 or $6,000 to lie. I mean, that's it, $5,000 or $6,000 to lie. Wow, it's crazy. Meanwhile, now it's an uphill battle to say, guys, that was wrong, but we can change it, right? In spite of that, thankfully, farmers still raise cattle, they still raise sheep, they still raise pigs and chickens and, ducks and, all sorts of stuff. Thank goodness. And so we can reverse a lot of issues if we go back to the plan that God had in mind for us from the beginning. In spite of the agrarian revolution, in spite of all these cereals, which, by the way, initially were fed to livestock to fatten them up. So are we really surprised when we eat these things as humans that we put on fat that we don't want? We shouldn't be, because that was the whole purpose, was to fatten up the animals, so therefore we would have more sustained, we'd have good saturated fats in them when we ate their meat. It's crazy. I want to get angry, but you know what? I'm not going to, because I would rather know the truth now and go forward and know that, hey, you know what? At least now I know the truth. I can do something about it. I know the truth about what God's plan is for us. At least I believe I do, and that he wants us to treat our bodies like temples by doing what? By eating the way he wanted us to eat. If I personally advocate meats only, and for a number of reasons, and that's because I do have gut issues. I cannot process fruit of any kind. I don't do well with vegetables at all, and anything processed is just crap, and it's poison, basically, so I don't eat it. So for me, it's ruminant animals only. Yeah. Ground beef, fatty ground beef. I got some ground lamb mince the other day, and I'm mixing those two together with some egg yolks, and it's awesome, and I feel great. Feel better than ever. But hey, if you enjoy sausages and bacon and chicken wings and thighs and whole chicken, go for it. If it's an animal product, go for it. Enjoy it. Absolutely. But for me, I can't just not say anything. Faith first always is something I've heard Dr. Klitt say. He's a doctor out of the U.S., and I believe, if I remember correctly, his specialty is reversing infertility through a meat-based diet. Anyways, he seems like a really cool guy. And that's my purpose. That's the purpose that I've found, is to help tell others about, hey, listen, whether you believe in God or not, okay, and he's still there, whether or not you believe in him, but he has a plan for all of us as a species. In order to thrive, we need animal fat and meats. Not loads of extra fat, just the fat that comes with meat. That's what we need. Get rid of all the other crap. And honestly, if you had told me 2 years ago that I would switch over to decaf and stop putting stuff in my coffee, in fact, spend more days drinking water than coffee, I'd have laughed in your face. But I am. And my joints have not felt this good since before my back injury in 2014. So there we go. Am I coming off my meds fully? No. I have to wait and talk to my doctor. However, I have been able to reduce my dosage a bit. For me, that's a victory. I used to have to take baclofen, which is a muscle relaxant. I haven't needed baclofen in 2 months. And like I said, I feel amazing. I have so much energy and joy and gratitude. And I hope this helps you guys. I realize that some of you may be like, yeah, but I don't like meat, or I seem to get a reaction. I know somebody who says that, she doesn't eat meat because she thinks that's what's giving her hives. I think it's because she's having broccoli with it, personally, but she doesn't want to hear that, so that's for her. But I'm really hoping that this could help you guys, because honestly, I've been so full of energy and so clear-minded. Now, if I was to start eating garbage again, all of my symptoms would absolutely come back. So it's not like I've been cured of fibromyalgia or chronic pain, but oh my goodness, I feel better 99% of the time. And the only time I get really sore, like have real back pain, is if I've overdone it at home. You know, too much, say, folding laundry or trying to get too much done at once. So I have to learn to just slow down sometimes. That's me. But other than that, I've not felt as great, I don't think, ever in my life. And if you are struggling with chronic pain or fibromyalgia, perhaps you're a person of faith and you're struggling to figure out how in the world is God going to help you. I'm not saying I have the answers. I'm not a doctor or a medical professional. In some ways, maybe that's how you can trust me, because I'm not. Everything I've tried myself first, okay? But this has helped me immensely. And because I was able to lose the weight and dramatically reduce my inflammation to almost nothing, my chronic pain, instead of being at a 12 out of 10, usually around a 3 or 4 most days. Again, unless I try to do too much. And that has allowed me to have a clear mind, to meditate, to pray, to walk with God, to enjoy my life and be grateful for all the blessings I have, and realize that I think here's my purpose. I mean, that doesn't mean it's going to be yours. But hey, listen, if you are struggling like I used to, if you're struggling with your weight and like me, because of your fibromyalgia, you can't do a traditional workout yet, what have you got to lose, right? Nothing. Other than if you may find your pain reduces, you may find that you get clear brain fog, and your overall general sense of joy and contentment could go up 1,000-fold. And it may seem like I'm promising a lot, but I'm not, because this is, I think, what we can have as humans if we follow the diet that God intended for us, which is to eat mainly animal meat with their fat. And, you know, if you can tolerate some berries or some fruit when it's local and in season, have at it. But be careful, because the sugar is going to spike everything. So I personally stick with just meat and mostly water or decaf coffee. And that works for me. Hey, guys, thank you so much for watching. This went longer than I had anticipated. Sorry, somebody in our back garden is cutting down some shrubs. But thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoy this video. If you like it, please, again, give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't yet joined, please, 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 please go ahead and subscribe. And let's support each other. Let's build a group of support for each other. Okay? Because sometimes a lot of the time, when we go simply with the traditional route of medication, it isn't enough. And this might help. This might help you. Share this with anybody you feel it might benefit. And otherwise, have a great Friday, guys. Love you, and we'll talk in the next video. Bye for now.